About 5 years ago, I worked as a high school janitor. It's a job that I had for a little over 6 months. This occurred, I think, in April or May. The high school I worked at was somewhat small, and I worked the overnight shift. My hours were weeknights from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. When I started work, there would usually be nobody there, and when I got off, there would occasionally be some people coming in early, but usually not many. On this night, it was shortly after I started, about 11:30 p.m., and I was mopping some of the floors in one of the west hallways. I was the only person in the entire school, and it was always sort of weird being all by myself in the school. The lights in the hallways were motion-sensing lights, so it was almost all dark other than the area that I was in. As I was right in the middle of mopping the hallway floor, I suddenly heard the sound of a basketball bouncing from inside the gym. For the first second, I thought nothing of it, until I realized that it was almost midnight and nobody else was supposed to be here. I stopped mopping and listened. I could barely hear it, and then it went away. The hallway that I was in was pretty close to the gym. There was another long, narrow hallway, and then some locker rooms were in between. I left my mop and walked down the narrow hallway to the basketball court. It was dark, and when I got to the door and opened it up, I could see that the lights in the gymnasium were all on, and a basketball was sitting on the ground up against a wall, but I didn't see any people in the gym anywhere. Clearly, somebody had just been in there, because the lights were on, and I had for sure heard the ball bouncing. There were a number of places where somebody could go or be hiding. I knew this was unlikely, but I thought maybe a teacher, coach, or player on the basketball team had stayed late for some reason. If this was the basketball season, that's what I would have thought, but the basketball season had been over for like a month. I called out, asking if anybody was there, but no one responded. I then walked over and checked the coaches' offices that were nearby. All of their lights were out and doors were shut. I then walked down the hall past my mop again to look out into the parking lot. It was completely empty aside from my car. I walked back over to my mop to continue, but as soon as I entered the hallway again, something caught my eye. I looked down to the very far end of the hall where I had seen something. I was just on time to see what appeared to be a man ducking into a room. The room was my janitor's closet. I yelled at the guy, asking what he was doing. I tried to sound loud but friendly, but probably came across as just nervous. To be honest, I was pretty creeped out. It didn't look like a student or a teacher. I asked whoever was there to leave the room, and I stayed all the way back at my end of the hallway, probably a good 150 feet away. After several minutes passed, and whoever was in there was clearly not leaving, I decided to go and confront them. I walked down the hallway to my janitor's room. When I got probably 20 feet away, a terrible nervous feeling came over me. I was almost shaking by the time I reached the door. I really don't know why I felt I had to open the door to tell them to leave looking back. I could have just called the police, but I guess you never know how you're going to react in certain situations, and it's easy to look back at them and point things out. Anyways, I was standing in front of the door for a few seconds before I psyched myself up and opened it. When the door opened, the room was mostly all dark with my cleaning supplies and tools in their usual places. I didn't see the guy, but less than a second after opening the door, suddenly I saw a large wooden pole headed for my head. I ducked down, narrowly missing it. I backed out and slammed the door shut and sprinted away. It seemed as though whoever was in there swung the top end of a wooden broom right at me. I didn't stop running until I was actually out of the building, and then I called the police. It didn't take long at all for them to get there, maybe like 2 minutes. When they arrived, they entered the school, and no more than 5 minutes later came out with the guy. He was a creepy-looking dude, and I honestly don't know when or how he got into the school. I'm also not sure why he tried to attack me, but that was enough to make me start looking for another job. This is my scariest story from when I worked as a night janitor. I've since quit the job, and this was a couple of years ago. I worked cleaning an office building at night, and it was my job to vacuum, sweep, and sanitize certain areas, as well as clean bathrooms. Pretty much what you would expect. The office building was a pretty typical one. Several floors, cubicles, and offices all around. It wasn't crazy big, enough that I could keep it clean during my overnight shift. One night, I was working and was a few hours in. Usually, it would just be me by myself and a security guard who worked on the first floor. We were the only 2 people in the building in the overnight hours. As I was cleaning in the office, I was near the stairs and suddenly heard someone walking near, and then open up the door from the stairwell. It was not the security guard, but another man. I did recognize him though. When I worked, my last hour would sometimes overlap with some of the guys who were getting into work on Fridays early. This office started work at like 6 or 7 a.m. on some Fridays and then ended at 10 a.m. It was like a half-day thing, which I never knew too many details about. But the point is, I did recognize this guy as someone who I had seen working in the office. I didn't know his name or anything, just his face. I asked him what he was doing here at this hour, which was like 1 a.m. The man said to me that he had forgotten something at his office and apologized and then just walked right past me. This was a little strange. I knew he worked there, but he seemed to be in a big hurry, so I just went back to work. I cleaned around the area for the next 30 minutes or so. It wasn't until then that I realized I never saw the man leaving. There was another exit, but it was way at the other end. I hadn't seen or heard the guy at all. I walked back over to where I had seen him walking to. I didn't see anybody or anything different. Something about it just seemed strange and I had a bad feeling, so I went down to talk to the overnight security guard on the first floor. When I got down there and spoke with him, he said he hadn't let anybody in the building at all since his shift started, and he hadn't seen anybody leave either. Now I was really confused. There was only one entrance or exit to the building where people would enter, other than some emergency exits. We both went upstairs to see if the man was still there. We searched up and down through the cubicles and other areas on the second floor. The man was nowhere to be found. There were some offices for the higher-ups in the company where we hadn't looked yet. There was no reason really for the guy to be in there, but just out of precaution, we decided to give it a shot. When we entered the first office and turned on the lights, suddenly I saw something move. It was under the desk, and sure enough, it turned out to be the same guy from before. We asked him what on earth he was doing hiding under the desk. This wasn't even his office either. The security guard asked the man for his company ID card or any kind of identification, but the man refused. We were forced to call the police then. The man kept complaining that he worked here, saying that he was going to have us fired if we didn't let him go. When the police arrived, we let them handle the situation for the most part. I found out some crazy details afterwards. The guy did used to work for the company, but had been fired almost a month prior. He had entered the building during business hours and hid inside a bathroom, somehow going undetected until 1 a.m. when he came up and I saw him. He went to his old boss's office and was planning to confront him when he got in for work that morning. I'm not sure if he wanted to fight him or what, but thankfully he didn't have any weapons on him. This was by far the weirdest and creepiest thing that ever happened in my time working there. I currently work as a janitor for a college near where I live. The campus is about a 10-minute drive away, and I typically work from 7 p.m. until about midnight. It's not too long, and I'm a part-time worker. This is a job I'm working to get some extra money while I save up for grad school. I work in the school's athletics building. All in all, it's a pretty easy job. Just typical cleaning of bathrooms, locker rooms, changing garbage cans, mopping, all that stuff. The building is nice, but the school is pretty small, only about 1,500 students, so it's nothing massive or anything like that. This was just this past spring, and the building, which closed at 11, was now empty aside from me. I was changing garbage down at one end of the building, near the south entrance. As I was doing this, I noticed the window right next to the doors. There was a man standing there looking in, right at me. This guy was smiling in the creepiest possible smile that he could have. I almost jumped back when I saw him. I looked at the guy, and his eyes were locked onto mine. I had to look away. The building was closed, and I don't know if this guy was wanting to get inside or just weird. He remained there, and I went back to work, trying to ignore him, as hard as that was to do. A few moments later, I looked back, and he was now gone. I was happy to see that. I continued with my work, and about 20 minutes later, when I was on the complete opposite end of the building, I saw the man again. His head was peeking in the window, and he had that same creepy smile on his face. I knew this guy had to be playing some kind of creepy joke on me. He had grayish hair and a slight beard, but other than that, all I noticed was how insane and creepy he looked. Then, he suddenly disappeared, only to reappear again at another window a few minutes later. The guy was starting to annoy me, and I was tired of him doing this. I saw him again a little bit later near one of the large windows at the other side of the building. It's like he followed me wherever I went in the building and went to a window nearby just to stare at me. This time, I had it and began walking over to the door to ask this guy what his problem was. As soon as I started to walk over there, though, he ran away. I stopped and figured that it wasn't worth my time. I should just do my job and ignore this creepy guy. He was probably harmless. But just as I was returning to my work, I heard the sound of glass breaking behind me. I turned around to see what appeared to be a large rock crashing through the window and glass going everywhere. After things settled, the only thing I heard was an insane and creepy sounding laugh from the man. I got out my phone and called the police right away. I was hoping this guy wouldn't enter the building, but he seemed content to just stand by it and laugh. The police got there in like 5 minutes, where the guy was still standing outside. He was caught by the police, who found that the man appeared to be high on several drugs, which explained his bizarre behavior. As for me, I was just glad he was gone, but the building had to have the window replaced.